Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Invisible Woman. I would have done Mr. Fantastic first, but I still don't have his potential, so I don't even have him at level 80, let alone tier 4, so there isn't really much to review there. However, for Invisible Woman, I was able to get her to tier 4. Thankfully, she is native tier 1, so for the first time in a few weeks or even months, I was able to use that discount effect on her and get her for a little bit cheaper than most of the native tier 2 to tier 4 characters have been. I'm going to jump right into the testing to show you my impressions of the character in PvE and PvP, as well as the significance that the tier 4 makes. The build that I had for her throughout all of the testing was using a mighty CTP of authority, so keep in mind obviously that for PvE I'm not using a damage proc. The general build that I have on her isn't anything too crazy. I have all mythic Urus, but I definitely have room for improvement. I can use Odin's. I don't have her artifact at all, so I could definitely get that. And obviously, if I really wanted to go all out, I could upgrade her mighty CTP of authority to a brilliant one. For the general first World Boss Legend test I did, I went into stage 29 of Null. I didn't use her leadership or any supports, and I, again, don't have a damage proc on her. And I was able to complete the stage with about close to 40 seconds left, which actually is really not that great. Characters that do well in PvE should be able to easily finish this stage with at least 1 minute left, and those that are actually quite strong in PvE will be able to complete this with well over maybe 2 minutes left. I would advise people not to build her for PvE, considering that she has more value in PvP, and also because she isn't really anything too special in PvE. However, if you are dead set on giving her a damage proc, you could obviously go the route of a CTP of Rage. However, the character is definitely proc friendly, so you could easily use a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction quite easily. You can see here that at level 80, she gains about a 2-minute improvement from before, which is kind of the expected result for taking a character from level 70 to 80. To get a better idea of her tier 4 upgrade compared to level 80, I also took her into a stage 84 of Null, this time using leadership and 2 supports, but she wasn't able to complete the stage and basically ran out of time with about 5 health bars left. If or when you decide to take the character to tier 4, you'll notice that she has a pretty solid stat bump. Her energy attack for me increased by around 15,000, and even the HP increased by around 26,000, which is good for a blast type. In terms of the striker for PvE, you could go with Thor, which is a good striker. You can also go with characters like Widow or Ghost Rider, which will match her instinct and are also good strikers for PvE. You could also use those characters as PvP strikers, as well as Spider-Man on top of that, possibly even Hulk too. Most of the recent tier 4s that have come out don't necessarily have to be taken to tier 4 for them to be good. Usually you can take them just to level 80 and tier 4 will just make them better, but not significantly better where they're horrible at level 80 and have to be taken to tier 4 to be great. For Invisible Woman, it seems to be the case that you kind of need to take her to tier 4 to see just how good she is. When you get her to tier 4, you not only get the tier 4 skill to fill up basically every rotation, but the tier 4 skill adds another layer of attacks and hits on top of that, so it basically changes the way that the character is played and makes her significantly better. You can see that with the clear time for this stage. Previously, she couldn't complete it and ran out of time with 5 health bars left, whereas after the tier 4, she got to the same 5 health bar mark about 2 minutes and 20 seconds faster, and then was able to complete the fight entirely about 10 seconds after that. Most of the level 80 to tier 4 upgrades that I've tested yield about 1 minute and 40 seconds to 2 minute improvement in clear times, whereas for Invisible Woman, it's more closer to 2 minutes and 20 second improvement, so it gives her a bigger upgrade. And the character also becomes more functional in things like ABX if you choose to use her there, as you'll see from the testing that I provide. With the upgrade, I was also able to take down stage 84 of Gore with roughly around 1 minute and 30 seconds left. However, the character doesn't have too much usability in World Boss Legend because she doesn't satisfy too many restrictions. And even the restrictions that she does satisfy, the character is a little bit wonky when you play her in the World Boss stages, because she doesn't have too much healing, so you can get hit a lot and get your health whittled down, and most of her skills kind of lock you in place. So if there's a lot of attacks going around, like the Gore stage, the Jean Grey or Dark Phoenix stage, it's going to be difficult to kind of keep her alive and do damage when you're locked down like that. The character doesn't really have any value in ABX or ABL because she doesn't satisfy any particular restrictions. You can potentially use her there if you're a newer player on the no restrictions day. However, there are definitely better options. The character also doesn't have all of the cancel effects for the different seasons for ABX. She simply has the burn and paralysis in her skills, but doesn't have the silence effect. Regardless, if you're curious how she performs there, I was able to hit around 9 million without a damage proc. As I mentioned before, the tier 4 skill does provide her with a significant improvement in things like ABX. Not only can she fill up the tier 4 skill fairly quickly so that you can keep spamming that tier 4 striker and get more hits and damage off, but the tier 4 skill also has hits on top of that, so you can raise your chain hit count or just hit count in general a lot more, and that's why I got close to a 2.5 million improvement going from level 70 to tier 4. The skill rotation for Invisible Woman is quite easy. You simply do 3, cancel 5, cancel 4, and when you have your Awakening skill, you just cancel that at the beginning and go into the same rotation of 3, cancel 5, cancel 4. When you have the character at tier 4, you want to also quick cancel the first and second skill to fill up that meter faster, but for the most part, you want to use the tier 4 skill immediately at the start of your rotation and cancel through your skills fairly quickly so that you can have it available again after you finish the rotation going into the next one. You can see that my clear time wasn't really the best. I finished within about 3 minutes, but you have to keep in mind that I'm not really using her artifact, which does make a significant difference when you get her to tier 4. So finishing within about 3 minutes and not having her artifact, as well as not using any Odins or damage proc, is actually quite decent. If I had those, she probably would have finished within 2 minutes or probably even 1 minute and 30 seconds or something like that. With the damage proc on top of that, it likely would have been under 60 seconds. Her PvE value is okay and does become good once you get her to tier 4, but most people obviously won't upgrade the character for her PvE usage. It'll likely be for her PvP usage, specifically because she provides that debuff cleanse as a passive as opposed to a leadership, allowing you to use different build compositions for your various teams, not necessarily in timeline since you're very restricted into the 3 characters that you're going to use, but mostly in things like Alliance Conquest and Otherworld Battle. She very clearly doesn't have a presence in timeline, but I took her there just to show you how she performs versus some of the top metas. And if you do choose to use her there, or even in PvP in general, you kind of need Franklin and his artifact to provide immortality to the character, enough for her to actually fill up her tier 4 skill and potentially go into her Awakening skill, which is where you're going to get the most value out of the character as a standalone. The character's AI rotation is pretty solid because it prioritizes her 2 best skills, usually opens up with the 4th skill, which is not only a full iframe, but also has 80% penetration to all sources and super guard break penetration, so it can lock down the opponent and head rock them in place. Following that, the character usually goes into the 5th skill, which provides her with 3 seconds of invincibility, as well as some healing, and it also is a partial iframe, not a full iframe, but also provides that super guard break penetration to continuously keep locking them down. And after she finishes her 5th skill, she usually goes back into the 4th skill, and then again into the 5th skill, and just kind of rotates between those 2. The character can be tricky to take down if the opponent doesn't have iframe ignore, or at least iframe ignore on a short cooldown, because she constantly just keeps rotating into these iframes, and her passive also gives her barrier and puts her into iframe as well. Besides that, she also has guaranteed dodge at around 30% and also has 40% damage reduction in her kit. And like I mentioned before, if you have Franklin's artifact, you can also give her immortality for up to 4 seconds, starting at 2 seconds if the artifact is level 4. Because the character's offensive capabilities are somewhat good, and you want to utilize the lockdown that she provides from her 4th and 5th skill, as well as getting to her tier 4 skill, which she gets to it pretty quickly, you ideally want to build the character in a more defensive-like build, So I would probably recommend using something like a CTP of Authority for her first and foremost, especially if you can get a Mighty or a Brilliant. You can try and stack up that damage reduction to that 100% and get that pseudo kind of immortality for the 5 seconds that it's up, making her even tougher to deal with for most characters outside of those that are at the very top meta. Other CTP options that you can consider are a CTP of Conquest or a CTP of Regen, but I don't think they would function as well as a CTP of Authority because she only has 3 seconds of Invincible on her 5th skill, so the CTP of Authority helps there. Besides that, her healing isn't really that great. It's only limited to the 5th skill, so the healing provided by the Conquest and the Regen won't be that great to help her with her survival, not as well as the Steel effects stacking up to give her that pseudo immortality. And besides that, even though CTP of Regen does function well on characters that don't have iframe ignore, because the character doesn't have too much healing, it won't really help her too much there, again, as much as the Steel Authority would if you stacked up that effect. It's clear to see that her value is most ideal in things like Alliance Conquest and Otherworld Battle. In Alliance Conquest, you can form a pretty solid team with Mr. Fantastic in the leadership position to increase her attack further, so again, you don't really need to go with the damage proc there. Then obviously you have to use Franklin to give you that passive effect for immortality, as well as the little health increase when she gets low. This will really help her go into her awakening skill as well as her tier 4 skill, which actually has some added interactions in things like Alliance Conquest and Otherworld Battle. The interesting thing that I noticed is that her tier 4 skill applies instantly and continuously in the area surrounding her, so if any characters spawn in that area, they'll immediately be snared and locked down. It seems to apply before their debuff removal applies, and again also if their debuff removal is on cooldown, they'll instantly be locked down. So you can actually see that in this particular fight versus Gore. She will be able to defeat him in his first life and then activate the tier 4 skill so that when he respawns, he'll immediately be locked down on the revival and then be killed by the rest of her skills. This is actually a very interesting and unique interaction because it effectively allows her to counter some revive characters and potentially deny characters that have awakenings from the revives from ever actually activating. So you can see that in this particular fight, not only was I able to defeat the first team here, which is actually quite decent of a team, but in the follow-up team, which is the Warriors of the Sky that obviously have the awakening skill after their revive, you can see here she immediately goes into the tier 4 skill and then they're immediately locked down. They don't go into their awakening skill right away. This means that you can potentially leverage this and utilize the character in Otherworld Battle, even versus meta characters, simply by putting her in the starting position, using Franklin to keep her alive with that Immortal artifact, and then immediately when she goes into the tier 4 skill and characters spawn in, they'll be locked down regardless of whether they have that debuff cleanse or not. This makes her especially useful in Otherworld Battle, especially when a lot of the meta characters are banned, because she can potentially lock down a lot of those awakening characters, or at least enough for you to take out one of their lives so that they don't completely wipe your team just from them kind of delaying those awakening skills and being the last one left to use their awakening skill. I'd say that for most people this character is a pass. You not only need to get her from the epic quest, you need to get her uniform, you also potentially need to get Franklin and his artifact to really make her useful in PvP, and besides that you kind of need to get her to tier 4 to really leverage her most useful mechanic or interaction in the PvP modes. On top of that, if you're not interested in PvP like Otherworld Battle or Alliance Conquest for the most part, then she doesn't really have value for you whatsoever. However, for the people that have met these requirements, she will be one of the top options for things like Otherworld Battle outside of Strife, who has an iframe ignore, because she has that unique interaction where she can lock down characters that spawn in and potentially even deny those awakening characters from really doing anything useful. It's also worth noting that she does have the best debuff cleanse in the game. She not only removes harmful CC effects, but also gives you immunity to them for duration, which most of the other debuff cleanses don't provide, so you can potentially be CC'd shortly after you're debuffed. It's really unfortunate that they didn't give her an iframe ignore. She could potentially be a pretty strong character if they did, but maybe that's something that they're considering with the next uniform down the line when maybe she gets the MCU tie-in. That essentially breaks down Invisible Woman, a pretty interesting and unique, and I would arguably say useful character for PvP, despite the fact that she doesn't have iframe ignore. I'm hoping to do the Mr. Fantastic video next once I finish his potential, and then probably look at Franklin and Valeria in terms of what builds you can use on the characters and what kind of usage they have and potential for the future. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know by hitting that like button, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing, potentially even sharing the video with other people. It'll definitely help me out, and it can potentially help them out as well. I always appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.